Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Today we'll be talking about parenting in the 21st century and this whole concept of effective parenting. But we must start with choices. Life is about choices. And for every parent, we always have these 5 choices we have to make. Are we going to have a child or children? How many? How many are we going to have? The third thing we will always need to ask is, what is the interval? Are we going to have them yearly? Are we going to have them every 3 years? Are we going to have them every 5 years? One of the most important things we need to understand is, how are we going to guide and discipline these children? And finally, what type of role model will I like to be for my child or children? So let's talk about the objective of today's session. We are going to talk about parental influence. Who is the boss in your house? We're going to discuss the important role of mother, father, and sometimes we have guardians or caregivers. We'll talk about how do we maintain balance to motivate our child. And lastly, we're going to talk about coping strategies to reclaim or attain effective parenting relationships. So let's talk. Who is the boss at your house? How do you maintain balance in your parent-child relationship? And are you ready to regain or attain effective parent-child relationship? At the end of this session, we will be able to answer those 3 questions. Start. Who is the boss at your home? People may say the baby is the boss. And often, when a child is now entering into a family, really, they are the boss for maybe the first year. They wake up, they tell us when to wake up, when to sleep. But then there are some people who establish that the father, he is the boss of this castle. Some people may say, nah, it's the mother. She's the boss. But what about for those who says that, my teenager seems to be the boss, or my child is the boss? Or could we say that stress? Some people may say stress. Some may say social media seems to be influencing my family. But some people may say God is the head of our home. So they may say religion is the head of their home. So we are going to really journey through this. One of the things we want to understand and establish in the very beginning of this discourse is that in the 21st century parenting, our children are exposed to so much information, and they are exposed to social media and so many things coming at them. As we view this picture, we could look at the good, the bad, the indifference that our children may experience. But what about peer pressure and expectations from all their systems? This affects our child and our children, some of the choices they have to make. But when we think about parenting a child or rearing a child promotes and supports the physical, emotional, social, spiritual, and intellectual development of a child from infancy to adulthood. Parenting or raising a child is not exclusive for the biological relationship. So let's continue. What is your approach to parenting? Now, in the theory, there is a deductive approach and there's an inductive approach to parenting. So we may look at this model and you may see a deductive starts with a theory. It confirms a hypothesis and it tends to be quantitative in research. I'll break it down into layman for you shortly. Or you may say an inductive approach where it starts with some data. It infers a conclusion from that data, and it tends to be qualitative in research. So let's discuss that for a moment. Deductive looks like this. My parents did it, and it worked for us, and this is how I'm going to train my child. That's very deductive, because it starts with a theory, and it ends with, this is the way, the popular, quantitative. Everybody say that. It worked for granny, it worked for mommy, it worked for auntie. This will work for me. However, inductive say that there's some data. You may look at new modern ways of parenting. You may look at different persons. So you're taking a little bit from everyone your parents, the new age, things that you think will be most effective. And from that approach, you are taking that approach and you are now applying it uniquely to your family. And that now yields a qualitative approach. A qualitative approach means that it is your personal experience. You are gathering and collecting these experiences according to the decisions that you have made. Now, we have to understand that diversity in a Caribbean family. What is the diversity? In the Caribbean, the studies have shown to us that the values and lifestyles would have come from these four. You could be one out of these four in the Caribbean. A marital union, a common law union, a visiting union, and a single family approach, co-parenting or single parenting approach. As we continue with diversity in Caribbean families, there is two approaches as we went from monarchy to democracy. And in the 21st century, I think we collectively agree that we have moved to democracy and move away from monarchy. So there's this essentialism perspective that says this approach suggests us that every member of the family has a role. They're like foot soldiers, and each person has a role and a function, which is kind of different from a social construct perspective. A social construct perspective now see this hierarchy approach where there is one person, this figure, peer, who makes the decision that is visible, but behind the scene, there's really the boss behind the scene. And I can only imagine, what are you thinking about? Who is the boss at your house? So as we continue from monarchy to democracy, and the roles, when we look at it from monarchy and it was very patriarchal society, you would have seen the ideal being the father is the head, and his primary role is provider and protector of the family. And he has the role to guide the males, and he will more interact with the males, unlike the female. It's not saying that he did not interact with the female, but his role was this masculine role, and he now will teach the boys how to be a man. And the mother, according to that society, would have been the person in the background who doing the nurturing role. So her role for the children was to nurture and to guide them and to feed them, the traditional things that we are accustomed to. But we can't say that the role of the mother in the modern day in a democratic society, I want you to put in the chat, is that the role of the mother today? Is that just that person who stays at home, washes the clothes, prepares the meal, cares for the children? No. I want you to put in the chat. I want you to comment in the chat. Is that a modern day woman? So here is a picture of a modern day woman. They said that she's a doctor, she's a lawyer, she's an evangelist, she's a teacher. She's so multifaceted. And in her is this diversity. So let's talk about the gender role. When we looked at a monarchy, based on the gender role, there were things that boys do, like daddy. They will be more industrious and they outside and they do the chores. And the girls would be indoor and they had to take care and follow after the mother. But we can say in a democracy, we could say that modern families don't always look like this picture of the monarchy. The roles are different. The roles are very different. So the role of the father could be more diverse than the role of the mother. So we want to understand that we have a heritage, but we have evolved, and the image of the family could look like the monarchy, but it could also look very diverse. Now with this, the primary thing we always have to consider is our parenting style. Whether we choose monarchy or we use a democratic approach, the parenting style is really, really important for the outcome. So here we have according to the theory, there is 4 parenting styles. Primarily, there's the authoritarian. And this approach says that I am the boss. So it is clear with an authoritarian, that the boss is the parent. Could be the father, could be the mother. They give orders and there's the do it or else approach. Then we have the authoritative. Most persons say in a Caribbean experience, they could really agree with the authoritative approach. This balance, understanding there's the role of the father, the role of the mother. It is more a balanced and friendly boss. You know, that boss that gives choices, but also sets limits. That boss will say there is a reward for good behavior or there is punishment for bad behaviors. As we evolve into the democracy, we would see this permissive. Over the past 2 decades, we would have started to observe a new style of parenting, which is a more friendly. So it's not like a boss, but it's more like a friend. This parent is more interactive. They are giving. Their goal is to make their children happy. Now, it's like a rubber band. Because though it is very indulgent and it's very interactive, it could also be that rubber band that could stretch and the boundaries could be compromised. So it could really look like a friend, and where the role expectation, there's a reverse in the role expectation with this approach. So you got to be careful. It's a good approach, but it comes with some consequences if you don't manage. And then for most of us, there are some people who say, I had a neglectful parent. And this is an uninvolved parent. And I like to be sensitive to this, It could be the parent that just give up. They don't know what to do next. It could be that parent that don't know how to be emotional and how to share these experiences with their child. Or it can be that parent who just abandoned parenting all entirely. So we like to look at it on a spectrum and don't just come to a conclusion, this conclusion that neglectful parent is a parent that don't care. Sometimes it's just really more complicated than that. But what we want to know is, regardless of this type of parenting that you have chosen, there is an attachment. And depends on how you attach to your child, there is an outcome. So let's take this moment to look at this video. We'll explain attachment, and you could put in the chat while you are looking at it. Tell me, what is your experience?
Today I want to talk to you about attachment theory. So what is attachment? Well, it's the connection between people that's made for the purposes of taking care of or being taken care of. Attachment occurs between a parent and a child from the moment of birth, possibly from the moment of conception. And effectively, the child is intuitively asking the question, will my needs be met? The child arrives at a conclusion anywhere from yes, probably, maybe, unlikely, to no. If the conclusion is to the yes, probably end, then the child is likely to be securely attached. If it's towards the maybe, unlikely or no end, the child may be insecurely attached. In the insecure situation, the child has very little power to change the parenting style, but they will tend to adapt their personhood in order to survive. This becomes their attachment style. One style is to be avoidant. That's to not have or not know our needs, so the frustration of them not being met is not so painful. Another style is to be continually checking to make sure that your needs are being attended to. Sometimes we call this needy. The official term is preoccupied. Another style is to make absolutely sure that your needs are going to be met. Sometimes we call this controlling. Another response can be to flip unpredictably between a range of styles. We call this chaotic. Our attachment style has implications for our adult relationships, and secure attachment can be learned in therapy.
I would like to ask you, it's a really sobering moment. As you look at the video, have you identified yourself? What's your style of attachment? This is important to know because often children becomes adults. And those experiences that they experience really, really impact the way they choose their partners. So if a child is secure, you find it so easy for him to find another secure person. But if that child have grown up and they were really anxious, they look for another anxious person. And if they were fearful, this avoidance. Some persons are very avoiding. With some persons, we may say they're very chaotic, but it's because of their experiences. So we have to know that every behavior, it is so easy for us to look at person and say what kind of behavior, whether it's a positive behavior or negative behavior. But I want you to know that according to the social model theory, and I like to talk about Bandura. Why? Because it's really true. When you look through the lens of theory, it helps you to be so objective and not subjective. And his formula looks like this. He says that what behavior is influenced by biological and environmental factors. So let's talk about biological. So beyond your hair type and your skin color and your eye color, people observe there's so much of you in one of your parents, or sometimes let's say parent to your children. Sometimes you look at your children and you say, oh my God, I cannot deny the fact that this child is just like me or like the father or just like the mother. Those are these genetic things that connects us to people, that some of the behaviors are so genetic. Some persons have never met other generations like their great-grandmother, and you may hear people say, oh my God, you do that just like mama, you talk like her, you laugh like her. Genetic things. But they are environmental. And we ought to know, because remember, one of our first choices was, what kind of role model am I going to be to my child or children? Now, according to the social learning theory, it talks about the stimuli focus. What your child pays attention to. And you ought to know this. It went on to say that they retain. So there's a rehearsal and encoding. So they pay attention, they look at you. Then they rehearse this behavior and encode it. Then there is a motor reproduction. This is a practicing by feedback. And then there is a motivation based on reward. So let me put that down in layman terms for you. There is that. Sometimes you look at your children and let's say behavior, because this is one of the things that parents complain about. And even in sessions, sometimes they say, the child might be very rude or the child aggressive. And I will always ask environmental factors. Is this behavior being modeled from the home environment? So I may ask, does the child do that like you or the father? And often there will be a silence in the room. Why? Because the stimuli is the parent behavior. And the child now, like a computer, encodes that behavior. And when they encode the behavior, they have to practice. So sometimes they start to practice the behavior on you or with you. And sometimes it's funny. If it's not offending you, sometimes we see parents perpetuate that behavior. And this is the positive feedback and the motivation, because they might say, they're rude to the father, but they ain't rude to me. Well, they're rude with their mother, but they're not rude to me. So what you will find, you have to be so careful. 80% of our learning is taught and 20% is taught. So we want to observe some of the decisions and how we do things, because our children automatically is motivated by their environment that produces a behavior. I know some people may argue and say, but we don't act like that. But we have to understand that our children are exposed to primary and secondary information and experiences. So they may be also exposed to family gatherings, to school, to church, to pond, to the mosque, to the temple. So there are many sources of interactions. But one of the things that we must be mindful of is positive role modeling and the impact. So I want to read this definition for you. The importance of good role modeling is simple. The theory said it's simple, but I know sometimes it could be complicated. They said when a child has a positive role model, they are likely to engage in constructive actions like the person that they look up to. I know that could be deep. The key thing there is that the child develops and have this positive role model as they pick up the habits and the perspective of the adult parent or caregiver over their lifetime. So I know sometimes we might say, ouch, but we have to now look in the mirror because they mirror us. Now, there are some experts that give some guidelines for us as it pertains to parenting children. And I want to be honest because sometimes it could be perplexed. And I myself, I'm a parent and I have boys and girls. So I have the experiences of boys and girls, and even for the relative that you are caregiving, you will find that the style is different. So Dr. Andrew Blackman, a psychologist, he said that, parenting children and, their behavior and motivating them is based on gender. He said, or the sex of the child. He said boys like action. They like to talk in fun. So they might be helping dad cleaning the yard or the outside, and they're very, very industrious, and you may find them interacting more. He said, unlike girls are more conversational. So they may like to sit and talk and do some introspection. But on the other, because we like perspective, because remember, it's about choices. But Dr. Paula LaFrance, he said that there's a difference. And through his years working with adolescents, what he observed was personality type. So there are many factors, but he looked at sometimes the personality of the child. Are they personality A, very analytical, they like structure? Or are they personality B, they are more laid back and, nothing is a hurry? Or are they ocean, this diverse child, this child who is very self-aware, emotionally intelligent, aware of others? So he said it depends on their personality. And I could say that in practice, I've also observed that. He said, but also safety factors produce a behavior. The time that you spend with a child makes a difference. The conversations that you have with that child makes a difference. Are you empathetic? Do you walk in their shoes? Do you live through their reality? And he said, often there's conflict when feelings are misunderstood. So as we continue, because I wanted to get different perspective, because we are talking about choices. Dr. John McPhee said with 25 years of experience working with juvenile delinquents, persons who have been behavioral issues, he said what he observed, the challenges are when parents talk but seldom listen. Now, while I was doing this, I was thinking of myself as a parent of young adults and adolescents. And I thought about how many times I spoke, but I didn't listen. He said there is a difference between hearing and listening. I will agree. You could hear many things, but you don't bound to be actively listening. He said when we listen, there's things that are happening. There's this verbal exchange that is happening. There is a non-verbal, the body language, the face, the shoulders, this sensory thing that's happening. What are they paying focus on? He said you have to now enter into their world, and you have to now try to experience what they are experiencing, what they are attempting to translate to you. He said now what he observed that he was able to extract after 25 years is that also parents have to identify when they screw up and how they screw up. He said you could ask your child, there is a resolution. Ask the child what works rather than your power role. Ask them what works. He said, be a social model. And he looked at not only trying to model your perfections, but also your imperfections. Make those be learning experiences. He said, from imperfections, teach them from that. Tell them what you have learned, even in your errors and the areas that you have just screwed up. So let's reflect on that for a moment. I know it's not easy, but we are looking for effective parenting. Why is this important? Because it helps with your child balancing that child, and it helps with the child's motivation. How much I wish that even my parents had teach me from their errors. But the study showed that the relationship between a parental involvement and a child's motivation is evident. It is wealth. They compare it to wealth. The data refers to it as wealth. They said when a parent is really connecting with that child and involved in that child's well-being, it is evident in their academic motivation. It is evident in their social modeling and well-being. It is evident in their school performance. They said it is evident how the child interpersonal skills. It is evident. And they said when it is evident, it is also more effective and supported by the other persons in their primary and secondary system. It means other caregivers, their siblings, teachers, and administrators. So the study show that our positive interactions with that child produces motivation. So as we're coming to drawing to the end of this presentation, and I know it's a lot to digest, I want to leave you with some coping strategies to reclaim and attain effective parent-child relationship. Like everything else, let's start with the problem and we end with the solution. Problem number 1. Sometimes your child may be experiencing psychological hindrance. They may have a cognitive disability. They might have been exposed to traumas or health issues. And this could affect the child's development. We ought to be mindful of that. Some children may be experiencing inattentiveness. They have a drive-by style. Or even the parent, they might say something once, and that child may need that information to be repeated. Some children are distracted. They are distracted by toys, by games, by social media. So you may need to think what is distracting them before you relate that information to them. Some children like dominant enthusiasm. They like a trigger. They act first and they think later. You ought to know who your child is. Are they that person? Children they just show apathy, laziness. We have to acknowledge that some children are just lazy. They find chores are unfair. They find that there's social injustices. So if your child is that, let's define our children. Put it in the chat. What about the temporary test mode? Oh my God. Have you ever lived in a house with somebody who loved to test boundaries and test your hot buttons? You say, come home a certain time, they come late. You say, don't, they hear do. Test modes, they are testing you. There are children who have this overpowering temptation. They like Curious George. They like to experiment. They like to try out new things. Now, some of these attributes, it's just like us. So sometimes they are modeling us. And then we have that child who have the destructive rebellion. They just must win. Do you have a child like that just must win at all costs? So Dr. Gonzalez, as we come to a close with this, would have said that psychological hindrance, they said, take that child for a medical check. Make sure all is well. Inattentiveness, make eye contact. Paraphrase. Ask for feedback because you want to engage them. Call their name. For those who are distracted, give time out. And not all time out must be a punishment. You can also give them a reward. They talk about dominating enthusiasm. Let's talk. Engage that child in a game and in problem solving. For that child that you say lazy, well, this one you may have to physically start the chore with them and progressively allow them to do it with a reward. For the child who is the test mode, they love to test you. You will have to give them time out. You will have to talk to them. You will have to show them the consequence of their action. Or you may even have to engage in professional therapy. For the child who is overpowering that Curious George, we have to help that child to understand the consequence for their action. And this is how we have to rescue them from rebellion. And we also need a professional intervention. And the last one, deceptive rebellion. Again, time out, loss of privileges, and speak to them calmly. There is this proverb that says, children live what they see. And we will show a video that we will see that children live what they see. And as we're coming to a close here, how do we maintain balance in our parent-child relationship? At different stages of our children's life, there's a different expectation and a role. Remember, we spoke about the first thing, the role modeling in those choices. So when a child is birth to 10, you wear the captain hat. They see you as the person that solves all problems. You are the hero. When your child is 11 to 14, through those years, they see you as a coach. They want you to encourage them and to motivate them. Between the ages of 15, as they enter into young adulthood, you become their counselor. The questions, the answers, the discussions, the point of view. So as consultant, often from 20 years and beyond, there is where you offer your children insight and support in their decision making. It is important to know at each stage where you are at. Are you the hero? Are you the coach? Are you the counselor? Or are you the consultant? Often, if your child has passed a stage of development, it's really difficult to recapture those stages that you have lost. But I advocate for you today to build a bridge. Build that bridge with social and emotional learning. Identify where do you need to build the bridge, whether it's at the coach or maybe at the consultant. Build that bridge. And I want you, there's just 5 steps that you need to know where you are. Do you need to, as you look at effective parenting, do I need to understand self-awareness? And do I build my bridge with self-awareness, understanding me, understanding my child? Do I need to, is it for decision making and problem solving? Do I need to build that bridge? Is it relationship skills? How can I be effective? Ask your child and negotiate. Is it social awareness? What do we do now? Sometimes when the child is at adolescent, they want to be out with their peers and you feel left behind. But you can build that social awareness and that bond. Or it is self-management, helping your child to manage themselves and manage relationships. So I end with this quote, and I thank you for this opportunity. It is easier to build a strong child than to repair a broken one. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.